Dispatch, Unit 22. We have another trauma victim, age 30. White female, lacerations across bottom jaw, right arm, and stomach. The victim's left bicep was bitten by an unknown male. Her breathing rate is stable. Heart rate 110. Prep for trauma were ETA 10 out. The dispatch radio announced from an ambulance, en route to the Racoon City Hospital Trauma Center. The Racoon City Hospital is a large facility. There are over 100 staff members and it's labeled as a trauma center. Nurses and doctors are rushing at the moment to prepare for their fourth trauma patient within 3 hours due to bites and clawing incidences, leaving severe bleeding and internal damage. Annie, a nurse, is just starting her shift to work throughout the night. Annie is a Navy combat vet who's experienced combat and saved many lives on the field and in the hospital. The hospital staff has called in additional support to assist in the amount of patients that have been coming in. Another ambulance dispatched. They will be arriving with an additional patient with life-threatening bite wounds, which appears to be from a human mouth. Doctors run by Annie as she's clocking in, and a few nurses follow close behind them. The sense of urgency in the facility is alerting Annie. She knows it's going to be a rough night. Dr. Reese, please come to the trauma room. Dr. Ramos, please come return to ER room 6. The intercom system announced by a female voice. Annie began to walk down the hall to her usual station on floor 1. Annie has worked in the hospital for 5 years. She became a nurse just after she departed from the Navy. Annie was warm and welcoming. She enjoys her job and helping people. A lot of the staff appreciates her always being there. She approaches the nurse station, greeting the staff nearby and checking the charts.
Hi, Annie. You're on floor 3. Dr. Rodriguez is on your floor. The emergency room had a lot going on tonight. There were bite victims, 4 ambulances in 1 hour. The police will be outside on guard because of it. Racoon City at its best, huh?
Annie acknowledged the nurse supervisor on level 1 and clicked her pen, then placed it in her scrubs. She walked up the hall and took the stairs to her new floor for the evening. The staff waved and looked relieved to see her. Hi, Annie, thank God. You're working with us tonight. It's been hell. ICU is becoming a nightmare. A nurse stated, shuffling files at a desk. The floor was cold and active with staff. The patients had most of their doors closed, but there was an unusual amount of moaning from inside some of the rooms of discomfort.
Pleasure to meet you, Doctor. My name is Annie. Room 4 came from trauma. He had gotten big by another man 3 hours ago. He seems slightly delusional, and his vitals are slowly decreased since he came in.
Annie is making her rounds and addressing needs to the patients. She comes across a few of the bite victims from hours ago. She notices their vitals changing. Heart rate decreased, blood pressure lowering. This patient is dying, Annie said to herself and signaled a response team to address. The staff is running around the floor helping everyone. Food trays are being passed out by the kitchen staff, and environmental services are cleaning rooms for new patients. A typical night. Or is it? Annie met with the doctor on the floor. She provided documents of the patient that was having issues with his sustained wounds. They discussed medical issues and statuses. She heard some growling from a room down the hall and glanced over, but nothing was there. She asked the doctor if these bite victims are all from the same host, and if everything seems to add up with each victim. The doctor replied, "We're not sure. They are, though, containing high amounts of bacteria and some sort of virus that mutates. But we can't figure it out. We sent the blood samples to another lab an hour ago."
Pleasure to meet you, Doctor. My name is Annie. Room 4 came from trauma. He had gotten big by another man 3 hours ago. He seems slightly delusional, and his vitals are slowly decreased since he came in.
The doctor came into view, the patient eager to understand his well-being. He placed gloves on his hands and put a mask on his face. The doctor began to examine the patient. In the room, there was also a medical tech who watches the patients when in need. The tech, a young girl, innocent and new to the medical field. Annie has seen dozens just like her. Annie nods and waves at the tech, hands her a chart, updated, and leaves the room. Dr. Rodriguez walks up to Annie as she exits the room. "Annie, good evening. I was viewing the patient in room 3. This bite on his arm is unique. He's overcoming a fever, but nothing in labs add up to why this is happening. Please keep an eye on him and report anything odd." Dr. Rodriguez explained to Annie with confusion and concern in her voice. Annie walked to the patient's room to check on him. She can hear grunts and moans coming from a nearby room and shuffling in the bed. She paused for a moment and the noise stopped. "Tommy, the night security on the levels 1 through 5 has walked by Annie. He greets her and stops to flirt for a moment and expresses concern for her safety tonight, stating, 'Call me if you need me, okay? Something weird is happening here.' I got a weird feeling in my gut. We just got another 2 ambulances with sick victims. They got scratched, and a new got bit her ankle by a Doberman. Those big dogs, she got bit up real bad." Annie patted his shoulder and smiled. "You know I'll call you Tommy. What's a girl gonna do without? Not like I didn't survive a combat zone, but it's sweet." Annie replied sarcastically and was cheerful. Tommy chuckled and continued on with his patrol, smiling as he walked away. Annie stepped into the patient's room, whom Dr. Rodriguez requested she keeps an eye on. The patient was seated up, and his bandages were being bled through. Annie assisted on replacing them with clean cloth. "It keeps bleeding and won't stop. I had them changed 3 times this hour. This crazy guy bit me earlier. I was walking from work to my car on the outskirts of town, and he just ran up and went right into my arm. I had ended up knocking him out. The cops came and the guy was gone." The man said, concerned, breathing heavy. His face was white and sweaty. He looked dehydrated. In the emergency room, the ambulances kept coming in. More attacked victims ranging from dog bites to human bites, punches and scratches. The police were showing up with extra security outside. They were taking statements. Once the patient cleared medical evaluation, all victims stated they were randomly attacked outside. One woman said a man broke through her screen door and jumped on her while she was cooking and bit her shoulder 3 times. 2 patients have died in trauma due to the bites, and 1 other patient I said to most likely die soon. Doctors were called in from their homes to help in the situation of emergency. Doctors didn't even have time to gather their thoughts before another patient came in. Some patients were running from the street, requesting help, while others were brought from police officers to be cleared before taking them to jail. 2 officers brought in 2 handcuffed rabid men with torn clothes, bloody faces, and arms. They appeared to be victims, but also aggressors. Doctors had to place bite masks on their faces due to them both biting the officers' hands and arms when being arrested. The The doctors were working on a patient that was brought by the police. Dr. Grant notices the teeth on the patient had flesh in them, human tissue. The man's shirt was cut open, and his chest portrayed a horrific wound. It was bit over 10 times. The blood coagulated. The police couldn't tell due to the man's rain jacket was closed when apprehended. The patient reached out and pulled the doctor into his face and tore his throat out. It smacked away his bite mask and bit into his shoulder. The other prisoner also lashed out, tackling the officer, head-butting him and clawing at his face until his mask came off, then began to bite him. The trauma center had now fallen to panic. The emergency room was overrun. The staff was being attacked, one nurse to another killing each other as the sickness spread from the bite wounds and clawing. The time it took to turn into a mindless, crazed, ferocious being was different each time. The morgue had bodies of the victims that weren't bit and pronounced dead, getting up out of their body bags. The halls filled with screams and terror as the creatures went floor to floor, infecting anyone in their paths. Annie heard screams on her floor. She stepped out of the room she was in. Annie walked slowly down the hall. The other staff members were not present. The nurse's station was empty. A security guard came running up behind her. She can hear screaming and yelling echoing throughout the hospital halls in all directions. A loud thud hit the door behind her in the room she was in. The man inside growling, punching the door and hitting his head against the glass portion of it. "Hey nurse, come on, we gotta go. The hospital is under attack. Everyone's killing each other, something I can't even explain," the guard said in panic, panting as he spoke.
"Annie, they're all dead. I watched Donnie get bit. This is terrible. We need to get out of the city. Maybe the helicopter is on the pad still. We can sneak over there. I can try to fly it."
A nurse ran past the two in the hall. She looked sick and scared, though she wasn't bleeding. She didn't even say a word to them. The man appeared out of a room ahead and was staring at the two in the hall. The man was bloody and growling, twitching his hands, his face confused and blank. The two ran opposite of him and up the stairs. They're going to attempt to reach the helicopter on the roof. An alarm sounded as they ran down the hall. Someone pulled the fire alarm. Annie and the security guard Chris ran through the halls, passing doorways that had staff getting eaten by the creatures. Annie felt fear. She began to have flashbacks of the war, people screaming for help, casualties and the noises. This situation was different. This was a new war for her, for all of them. They ran up the stairwells and sections of the hospital, dodging the walking dead, temporarily stopping in empty rooms to hide and catch their breaths. Annie and Chris made it up on level 6. On this floor, there were a few security guards. The guards looked battered and bloody, like they just got out of a medieval battle. They were wounded, bitten, clawed, and battered. "Don't stay here, keep going." "Chris, glad you're okay, bother. We're screwed. Go, it's safe from here. We killed over 15 of them. And Nikki, put Em in that room." The guard said, spitting blood from his mouth. His uniform covered in blood as well as Nikki's uniform. Nikki stood by the doorway silently, no expression, the same look someone has when they first see combat. "Hey guys, go to the roof. That's your best bet, and lock all the doors behind you. I can't breathe right. I think I'm changing into those things. Don't look back, just run," Nikki said. His body had several cuts and bites, his uniform cut and bloody. Annie and Chris took off running. Annie, with tears in her eyes, looked back at the guards. Nikki, moving slowly, turned away, and life left his face. The others turning slowly, panting, moaning, and scared. A group of the undead running up the hall from behind. Nikki roared and tried to still stop them. While running up the hall with Chris, several staff members ran past them in the opposite direction. Annie yelled, "No, don't go that way. Stop, guys." But they kept going, as if they didn't hear her. The two kept running up. They can hear from behind them the screaming of the staff, and creatures are still chasing them. "We're almost there, just ahead, and we take the stairs up. It leads outside. I have a key card," Chris said, panting as he speaks, running. The floor is covered in blood, handprints and smears on the walls. The cold air brushing past their faces, they can feel it in their bones. Chris and Annie made it to the roof helipad and opened the door. It was raining. Gunshots can be heard all over the city, along with screams, emergency vehicles, sirens, and undead moans. Chris took a step forward, and in an instant, a bullet hit him. Chris died instantly. Annie, with quick reaction, grabbed his key card and looked in disbelief at the helicopter. It was destroyed. "Who would do this? What the hell?" she said softly. She rushed back inside. It was not safe on the roof. Annie saw a lounge close by. It's the doctor's quarters for sleeping. Annie used the key card and opened the door, entering the doctor's lounge. It was warm, a nice bed, and computer-illuminated parts of the room. Annie sat on the bed trying to gather her thoughts. She was remembering being on the battlefield, explosions, and death. She remembered how to control it again. "My only way out is down. I'll have to go back down there. I'm going to have to fight through this," Annie said, optimistically to herself, searching the room for weapons. Annie thought back on her training. She remembers who she is. She's a soldier.